The first thing I remember is the spoon in my son's hand. It was a plain maple spoon, worn pale at the edge from years of stirring oats and stew, and he kept turning it over on the kitchen table while the rain tapped against the window. His wife had gone upstairs early. He waited until he heard the bedroom door close before he asked me the question. He said, "Dad, what is a husband supposed to do when his wife says no?" I answered him before the spoon stopped moving. That was the mistake. Some words take only a breath to speak, but a family can spend years living inside them. My name is Mullen. I have been Amish all my life. I have worked the same fields for more than 50 years, raised children beneath the same roof where my grandchildren now leave their muddy boots, and learned that age does not make a man wise unless he is willing to look plainly at the harm he has done. I am telling you this because there are answers a father gives from pride and answers he gives from love, and sometimes he does not know the difference until it is too late. As you listen, I would ask you to think about the advice you inherited from the people who raised you. Have you ever repeated something simply because it was repeated to you? My son Samuel had been married to Ruth for 6 years when he came to me that evening. They lived in the small white house beyond our north pasture, the one with the young pear tree beside the wash line. Samuel had built the kitchen cupboards himself. The doors did not hang perfectly straight, but Ruth kept them polished, and the whole house smelled of beeswax and bread whenever I stepped inside. They had 2 children then. Daniel was 4, and little Esther had only begun to speak in full sentences. From the outside, Samuel and Ruth looked steady. They sat together in meeting. They brought their children to Sunday supper. Ruth laughed easily with my wife Anna while they washed dishes. Samuel was a hard worker and rarely complained. That is one danger of judging a marriage from the outside. Quiet can look like peace from across a room. The day he asked me that question, Anna had gone to sit with her sister, whose knees had become too weak for the stairs. Samuel came by after supper and said he needed help repairing a loose hinge on the pantry door. We fixed it in 10 minutes. Then he remained at the table. I knew there was more. He did not look at me when he spoke. He said Ruth had been tired for weeks. Their youngest had been waking in the night. There had been sickness in her family. The garden had not done well, and she was worried about the winter stores. Samuel said that when he reached for closeness, she sometimes told him no. He did not tell me this crudely. My son was never a crude man. He spoke with embarrassment and hurt, as though her refusal meant he had become unwanted in his own home. I should have asked him what Ruth was carrying. I should have asked whether he had listened to her. I should have told him that marriage does not erase a person's right to speak honestly about her own body, her weariness, or her fear. Instead, I heard my own father's voice. My father was a stern man. He believed that every household had an order and that peace depended upon nobody questioning it. When I was young, he taught me that a husband must never appear weak before his wife. He said a woman might test a man without meaning to, and if he yielded once, she would cease to respect him. These things were not shouted, they were spoken beside fences and wagon wheels in the calm tone men use when they believe they are passing down wisdom. So I looked at Samuel, my own grown son, and I said, "A wife should not make her husband beg for what belongs inside a marriage. Be patient, but do not let her no become the rule of your house." That was all. I did not tell him to hurt her. I did not tell him to force himself upon her. But I gave him something almost as dangerous. I gave his wounded pride a holy-sounding reason to ignore her pain. Samuel stopped turning the spoon. He nodded once. I remember feeling relieved, as though I had settled something for him. He thanked me, put on his hat, and walked home through the rain. For several weeks, nothing seemed different. That is another truth about harmful advice. It rarely announces itself at the door. It enters quietly and begins moving the furniture. Samuel became colder with Ruth. I learned this later. When she said she was tired, he reminded her that he worked from before sunrise. When she asked for time, he treated it as rejection. He stopped asking what was wrong because he believed the asking itself made him weak. He did not strike her. He did not drag her anywhere. He did something quieter. He made tenderness conditional upon her agreement. When she refused closeness, he withdrew his kindness. He ate without speaking. He slept facing the wall. He left before the children woke. He let silence become a punishment and called it patience. Ruth began moving through her own house as if every board might creak beneath her feet. Anna noticed first. Women often see what men have trained themselves not to notice. One Sunday, Ruth arrived with a basket of biscuits. She had forgotten the cloth that usually covered them, and the tops were dry from the wind. This was a small thing. Ruth never forgot the cloth. While the children played near the woodpile, Anna stood beside me on the porch and said, "Something is wrong in that house." I told her Samuel and Ruth were adjusting to a difficult season. Anna looked at me for a long moment. Then she said one sentence I have carried ever since. A difficult season does not make a woman afraid of her own husband. I felt anger rise in me, not because she was wrong, but because part of me already knew she might be right. Pride is often loudest when truth has come near it. I told Anna not to interfere. I said every marriage had private troubles. She lowered her eyes, but she did not agree. My wife has always known how to remain quiet without surrendering her judgment. 2 nights later, Samuel came to our door after dark. There was mud to his knees. He had walked through the lower field instead of taking the lane. His face looked gray in the lamplight. Ruth had taken the children to her parents. She left a note on the table. Samuel carried it folded in his shirt pocket, though by then the paper was soft from being opened. He did not hand it to me. He read one line aloud. "I cannot keep living where my no is treated as a sin against you." The room became very still. I wish I could tell you that I confessed my part immediately. I did not. I asked Samuel what had happened. I asked whether they had argued. I asked whether Ruth had become unreasonable. I searched for every explanation that would allow me to remain innocent. Samuel said, "I did what you told me." There are sentences that sound different when spoken by your child. He had taken my words and built a wall with them. Every cold meal, every turn back, every sharp reminder of duty had been laid like another stone. He had believed he was protecting his marriage. In truth, he was teaching his wife that peace in their home depended upon her silence. Samuel sat at our table until morning. He did not cry. He stared at the lamp chimney while the flame burned low. I sat across from him with my hands folded, unable to find a sentence that did not sound small. At sunrise, I walked to the barn. The rain had stopped, but the roof still dripped along the east side. I remember the smell of wet hay and leather. I stood beside the stall where my old mare used to be and thought of my father. He had been dead more than 20 years by then. Yet there he was, still speaking through me, still directing a marriage he had never seen. That frightened me. We like to believe inheritance is land, tools, recipes, quilts, and family names. But a man can also inherit a fear. He can inherit a cruelty so ordinary that nobody calls it cruelty. He can receive a false idea wrapped carefully in scripture and pass it to his son as though it were a blessing. I had done that. When Anna found me, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. I expected anger. What I saw was grief. She asked, "Did you ever wonder why I said yes to you?" I did not understand. She said, "Not whether I did, why I did." We had been married nearly 40 years, and I had never asked myself that question. I knew my wife had sometimes been tired. I knew there were nights when the babies cried, mornings when she worked beside me with a headache, winters when money was thin and worry sat between us at the table. I knew there had been times she turned away and times she did not, but I had thought mostly about my own experience of those moments. I had not considered how often a woman in our community might say yes because no felt too costly. Anna did not accuse me of things I had not done. She did not rewrite our marriage as something it was not. She simply made me look at a door I had never tried to open. She said, "Love that cannot hear, no will never know whether yes is freely given." I went back into the house and told Samuel that my advice had been wrong. He looked at me as if he had not heard correctly. I said it again. I told him that Ruth's refusal did not diminish him. I told him her weariness was not rebellion. I told him he had no right to punish honesty with coldness. Then I told him the hardest part. The fault was not only his. I had given him permission to make his pride more important than her safety. Samuel wanted me to tell him how to bring her home. This time I did not answer quickly. I said, "You do not begin by asking her to come home. You begin by making it possible for her to believe you understand why she left." We harnessed the horse after breakfast and drove to Ruth's parents'. The road was soft from the rain. Wheels sank into the ruts and the horse pulled slowly. Samuel sat beside me, his shoulders bent forward. Neither of us spoke much. Ruth's father met us near the gate. His name was Amish. He was a quiet cabinet maker with broad hands and a habit of measuring his words before he used them. He did not invite us inside. Samuel said he wanted to see Ruth. Amish answered, "She will decide whether she wants to see you." A younger version of me might have called that disrespect. That morning I heard it as protection. We waited in the buggy nearly an hour. The clouds lifted a little and water shone in the wagon tracks. Samuel rubbed his thumb over a split in the leather rein until the skin turned red. At last Ruth came onto the porch. She did not bring the children. She wore a dark blue dress and held her hands together at her waist. She looked smaller than I remembered. Samuel stepped down from the buggy. He began to apologize, but his words came too quickly. He spoke about stress, misunderstanding, and the advice he had received. Ruth listened until he mentioned me. Then she said, "Your father did not live in our house." Samuel went silent. That was the moment he understood that my guilt could not carry his responsibility. I had placed a weapon in his hand, but he had chosen to use it, not with violence, but with pressure, distance, and shame. He could not repair the harm by pointing to the man who taught him. He said, "You are right." Those 3 words were the beginning of whatever healing later came. Not because they solved anything, but because they were the first words he spoke that did not ask Ruth to doubt her own experience. She did not return home that day. She did not return the next week either. For almost 5 months, Samuel lived alone in the little white house. The pear tree lost its leaves. Frost came to the fields. He cooked his own meals and washed his own clothes. More importantly, he stopped treating her absence as a punishment she was inflicting upon him. He began visiting an older couple in a neighboring district who had helped other families through difficult seasons. He listened more than he spoke. He wrote Ruth letters, but he did not ask the children to carry them. He gave them to Amos and accepted that Ruth might not read them. In his first letters, he explained himself. In later letters, he stopped explaining. He wrote about what he had done. He named the silences. He named the way he had withdrawn affection. He named the fear he had mistaken for respect. He did not ask her to comfort him for feeling ashamed. That difference matters. Regret often wants quick forgiveness because forgiveness relieves the person who caused the harm. Repentance is slower. It accepts that the injured person may need time, distance, and proof. During those months, Samuel changed in ways that were not visible from the road. He learned to sit with an answer he did not like. He learned that being denied something did not make him powerless. He learned that a wife was not a mirror created to reflect back his worth as a man. But the damage did ruin something in him. It ruined the certainty he had carried since boyhood. It ruined his belief that authority and love were the same thing. It ruined his trust in the simple answers men give one another when no woman is present to describe the cost. At the time, I thought that ruin was only tragedy. Now I believe some parts of a man must be ruined before he can become safe for the people who love him. Ruth eventually agreed to meet Samuel each Sunday afternoon at her parents' house. They sat on the porch where others were near enough to be called if she wished. Samuel did not complain about this. He answered her questions. When she asked why he had turned cold, he did not say because she had rejected him. He said because he wanted to make her refusal painful enough that she would stop refusing. That was hard for him to admit. It was harder for her to hear. She asked whether he understood that this was a kind of coercion, even if he had never forced her physically. Samuel said yes. He had learned that pressure does not need a raised hand. Sometimes it is the removal of warmth, safety, and belonging until surrender feels easier than honesty. When winter settled in, Ruth brought the children to the little house for an afternoon. She remained with them. Samuel had cleaned everything. There was soup on the stove and fresh straw in the entryway to catch the snow. He did not reach for her. He did not ask how long she would stay. After they left, he came to our house and said, "She laughed once." He spoke those words as though someone had placed a candle in a dark room. Ruth returned home in the spring, but not because the bishop ordered her, and not because Samuel demanded his rights. She returned because over many months he had given her reasons to believe that her voice would no longer be punished. Their marriage did not become perfect. No honest marriage does. Trust came back like warmth to frozen ground unevenly. Some places softened early, some stayed hard until late in the season. There were days when Samuel became defensive. There were days when Ruth remembered something and could not hide the hurt on her face. He learned not to ask her to hurry past it. She learned that when she said no, the house would remain peaceful. The children learned, without anyone sitting them down to explain it, that affection did not have to be purchased with obedience. Years later, Samuel came to me while we were repairing fence after a storm. He had gray beginning at his temples. Daniel was nearly grown by then. We worked most of the morning without speaking about anything beyond wire and posts. At noon, Samuel set down the pliers and said, "Daniel will marry someday." I knew what he meant. He was asking how to prevent the same words from traveling into another generation. I told him, "Tell your son that the person he marries does not become less of a person because she loves him. Tell him that no is not the end of closeness. Sometimes it is the beginning of understanding." Samuel nodded. Then he said, "You tell him too." So I did. I sat with my grandson beside the workshop one evening when he was old enough to hear it. I told him the whole story, including my part. I did not protect my dignity. A grandfather who hides his failures leaves his grandchildren to repeat them. Daniel listened the way young men do when an old man finally stops pretending age has made him innocent. I told him that marriage is not ownership. It is not a promise that another person will never disappoint you, refuse you, or need something different from what you want. It is a promise to remain truthful and tender when those moments come. I told him that a yes has meaning only where a no is safe. That is what 70 years have taught me about this. A man is not diminished when his wife speaks honestly. He is being trusted with the truth. What he does with that truth will shape the whole house. He can receive it with humility, or he can make honesty so expensive that silence takes its place. I once believed a husband kept order by refusing to yield. Now I believe the strongest thing a husband can do is make room for the full humanity of the person beside him, especially when her answer wounds his pride. My son asked me what to do when his wife said no. I should have said, listen. One word would have spared them years of pain. I cannot go back to that rainy evening. I cannot take the spoon from Samuel's hand or call back the sentence I gave him. But I can tell the truth now. Sometimes that is the only repair age allows. If this story brought something to mind from your own family, you may leave it in the comments. You do not need to share anything private. I would simply like to know what piece of advice you were given that you later had to question. And if you value stories told slowly by a man still learning from the life behind him, you are welcome to subscribe. There are more things I should have understood sooner, and I intend to speak them while I still have time.